For almost 1,000 years, England and France were more than just neighboring rivals. They were the center of European conflict itself. Wars between them were so common that kings planned their reigns around the next inevitable clash across the Channel. Castles were built with the other side in mind. Armies were raised in anticipation. Borders shifted again and again, not because peace had failed, but because war was expected. Fighting France was not seen as a disaster for England, and fighting England was not seen as a crisis for France. It was treated as the normal state of the world. And then, without a grand treaty or a dramatic reconciliation, it stopped. The rivalry that once shaped Europe didn't end with peace. It ended because it no longer made sense to continue. To understand how this happened, we need to understand why England and France were enemies in the first place. Their conflict was not driven by hatred, culture, or national identity. Those ideas barely existed when the rivalry began. Instead, they were enemies because of how power itself was organized in medieval Europe. After the fall of Roman authority in the West, power did not disappear, it shattered. Central control collapsed, and local strongmen filled the vacuum. These men became kings, but their authority did not come from borders or institutions, it came from land. Whoever controlled land controlled people, wealth, and armies. Power was personal, inherited, and enforced through loyalty rather than law. Feudalism emerged as a way to manage this chaos, but it was never stable. Kings granted land to nobles in exchange for service, usually military service. In theory, this system created order. In reality, it created endless tension. A noble could hold land from more than one king at the same time. He might owe loyalty to one ruler for one castle and to another ruler for a different estate. These overlapping obligations made conflict almost unavoidable. A single disagreement over taxes, military service, or the control of a fortified town could escalate into years of war. These wars were not driven by ambition alone. They were driven by legal claims that could not be cleanly resolved. England and France became deeply trapped inside this system. Their ruling elites married into each other's families. Nobles owned land on both sides of the Channel. Kings operated under the same feudal rules. This closeness did not bring stability, it guaranteed friction. Every shared obligation carried the risk of violence. Even when wars ended, the reasons for fighting remained. Peace was never permanent, it was only a pause. This is why early conflict between England and France felt inevitable to those living through it. The system itself produced war. As long as power worked this way, England and France did not need reasons to fight. The structure supplied them, and that structure became far more dangerous in 1066. When William, Duke of Normandy, crossed the Channel and conquered England, he did more than change the ruler of one kingdom. He created a contradiction that feudal law could recognize but could never fix. As King of England, he was fully sovereign, no one stood above him. But as Duke of Normandy, he was still legally a vassal of the French king, obligated to provide loyalty, taxes, and military support. Feudalism treated these roles as separate identities, as if a ruler could change legal personalities depending on where he stood. In practice, this separation collapsed immediately. When the English king acted independently in Normandy, it looked like rebellion. When the French king tried to assert authority over Normandy, it looked like foreign interference. Both interpretations were legally valid, neither could be ignored. William's successors inherited this problem intact. Over time, English kings expanded their holdings in France through marriage, inheritance, and war. By the height of this expansion, the English crown controlled vast territories across western France. On paper, these lands were held as feudal possessions. In reality, they gave England power that rivaled the French monarchy itself. This imbalance poisoned the system. French kings could not enforce authority without provoking resistance. English kings could not submit without undermining their own sovereignty. Even the smallest disputes could ignite major wars. Control of a single castle, the right to collect taxes from a port, or the obligation to provide troops could escalate into full-scale conflict. These wars followed a familiar pattern. Fighting would erupt, a truce would be signed. Nothing fundamental would change. Each generation inherited not only land and titles, but unresolved disputes. Over time, war stopped feeling temporary. It became an expectation built into governance itself. What began as a dynastic accident hardened into a permanent rivalry. England and France were no longer just connected by history, they were trapped by it, and this feudal system, once meant to organize power, now guaranteed its breakdown. The crisis finally arrived in the early 13th century. A series of royal deaths left the French throne without a clear male heir. For centuries, overlapping claims had been tolerated. Now they demanded a final answer. The English king possessed a legitimate claim to the French crown through his mother. In a system built on inheritance, this was not unreasonable, but accepting that claim would have placed France under English rule, effectively ending French independence. The French nobility rejected the claim and changed the rules of succession to exclude it. For England, this was not just an insult, it was a threat. If France could rewrite inheritance law to deny the crown, it could also challenge England's right to its lands in France. Pressing the claim became a way to force the system to confront its contradictions. Compromise became impossible. France could not accept an English ruler. England could not retreat without becoming vulnerable. Feudal arbitration failed. War became the only remaining option. The conflict that followed, later known as the 100 Years' War, was not a single continuous campaign. It came in waves, separated by truces that merely delayed the next round of fighting. Each generation inherited unfinished business. Early English victories proved military strength, but failed to create stable rule. Over time, France changed. Loyalty shifted away from individual lords and toward the crown itself. Resistance became national rather than feudal. By the mid-15th century, England's position in France collapsed. Territory after territory was lost until a symbolic foothold remained. The English kings continued to claim the French title for centuries, but it had become ceremonial. The legal and military foundation was gone. More importantly, the war had broken the structural tie that had bound England and France together since 1066. England no longer ruled land in France. France no longer faced foreign kingship. The feudal contradiction that had sustained centuries of conflict finally collapsed. But hostility did not disappear. It changed form. Conflict was no longer about who ruled whom. It became about who would shape the wider world. As both states consolidated power at home, war became a decision of the state, not a feud over inheritance. Competition moved overseas. Colonies, trade routes, and naval power replaced castles and duchies. Battles were fought across oceans. Yet even as rivalry expanded, it remained controlled. Defeat hurt, but it was survivable. Neither side sought the destruction of the other. That balance shattered in 1789. The French Revolution did not just change governments, it destroyed the rules that had kept rivalry manageable. War was no longer a contest between similar states, it became a threat to the system itself. France mobilized entire populations, armies reached unprecedented size, and authority came not from kings, but from the nation. For Britain, this was terrifying. A revolutionary France threatened legitimacy everywhere. Napoleon turned this chaos into a weapon. Under his rule, France became a centralized war machine capable of overwhelming entire coalitions. Britain responded not by trying to dismantle France, but by containing Napoleon. When he fell, Britain faced a choice it had never encountered before. It could dismantle France permanently or preserve it. Britain chose preservation, not of mercy, but fear. A Europe without France would be unstable and dangerous. From that moment, the logic of permanent rivalry collapsed. France became part of the system Britain needed to survive. Over time, cooperation replaced expectation of war. Industrialization reinforced this shift. Power now came from factories, populations, and technology, not dynastic claims. Rivalry softened into comparison. The final transformation came with the rise of Germany. A unified, industrialized power at the heart of Europe forced Britain and France into alignment. Old hostility no longer served survival. Cooperation did. When the two fought side by side in world wars, the last remnants of ancient rivalry vanished. War between them became unthinkable. England and France did not stop being enemies because they forgave the past. They stopped because the world changed. The forces that once made hostility inevitable disappeared. When being enemies no longer explained the world, the rivalry ended on its own.